I had no idea there was such interest in St. Augustine. It's very edifying. Well, let me just begin. I should forewarn you that on my flight in, my ears got jammed, and I don't know how loud I'm talking. So if I seem to be screaming at you, someone tell me to lower it down a little bit. And during the Q&A, if you would speak up, that would be great as well. Well, let's just start out without any further announcements. The moral universe of Batman's Gotham City and Augustine's late empire bear certain resemblances to one another. People have lost their way. They are, Augustine might say, wrongly oriented. Their faces are not turned toward the source of love and illumination. They have turned away from the light. Now jump to a cartoon that appeared in newspapers throughout the United States on July 23rd of this year that draws together ancient Rome and the crumbling metropolis of Gotham City. The cartoon features a single stark image, no words, but the cartoonist knew that what he had done would be instantly recognizable. A black mask replete with pointy ears, a slit for eyes and nose, the mouth and chin uncovered. The mask culminates in a cowl and features black garb all the way down, although all we see is what's called a headshot in the cartoon. Teardrops flow down the mask. We, those of us now living, know, of course, who this is and why he is weeping. He is the Dark Knight, mourning the murders committed in a movie theater on July 23rd, 2012. An evil massacre, some called it. Movie theater that, as you all know, was screening the third film of a three-part series on his life and exploits. This outburst of violence invites the deepest sorrow and anger from the Dark Knight, even as the fall of Rome agitated and sorrowed St. Jerome, St. Augustine, and so many others who, although they had their arguments with Rome, were devastated when Rome was destroyed, was sacked. Now, suppose someone 100 years from now happens upon this image. What will he or she think? We cannot say for certain, but we do know the viewer, seeing tears and a grimly set jaw, will think sorrow and anger and appreciate ever more forcefully the sad subterranean streams of life and the innate troubles that are our human inheritance. St. Augustine would have no problem, none at all, recognizing a tragic moment that has deeply stirred the strange figure in black. For what unites the Dark Knight and the saint is a recognition of the alienation of the human condition, our flawed being in a world of profound moral ambiguities, and a determination to fight the nihilism that is violence unleashed. There is more, of course, deep background, one might call it, that helps us to make sense of a tragic image, whether of skyscrapers imploding, collapsing in on themselves, or of Rome being sacked by a wandering band that the ordinary Roman would see as a gaggle of barbarians. Neither Batman nor St. Augustine possesses superhuman powers. Many of the other superheroes do have such powers. Batman does not. If there is a moral code for them to follow, it must be one available to human beings, one they can aspire to, if not attain fully. Augustine teaches, do no harm and help whenever you can. That's a sort of minimal basis for morality. Batman teaches that good people, not perfect people, for none exist, must act in the face of evil in order to prevent evil from having its day and sealing a terrible triumph over a weak and fearful humanity. On this earth, there will be no culminating moment of triumph, no trumpets heralding a new dawn when man shall know no more sorrow, and no one will ever slay another again in anger. Treachery, Batman understands, will never be vanquished altogether. Perpetual peace, St. Augustine understands, will never stretch before us in a limitless horizon. That is a difficult realization, whether in the 4th or 5th centuries or the 21st. Our quest for perfection knows no rest. Here one need go no further, I'm not going to talk about this, but just mention it, than to consult today's genetic utopians with their prophecies of a genetically purified future in which only the most fit are born, or should they have somehow escaped the genetic police, if they're not perfect, for instruction on one line of self-made man's more perfect self. Sorry I garbled that sentence, but you get the picture. We need no longer rest content, they tell us, with human biological imperfection. So we're going to make it perfect. We're going to fix it all. There are many other examples one might point to, but this must suffice for now. All right, now let's go to evil, because if we're going to understand either or both St. Augustine and the Dark Knight, we've got to get a handle on evil and how they understand evil. To explore and understand this connection, we have to figure out how both figures struggled with the consequences of evil in their respective times. There are many now, especially among our intellectual and professional elites, who would banish evil from our vocabularies. And they have succeeded to a great extent, at least in certain circles. This despite the fact that Americans historically have deployed biblical language in both their private and their public lives. A few years ago, a literary scholar named Andrew Delbanco, perhaps known to some of you, wrote a book on the death of Satan in American culture. And he fretted about the disappearance of this and other representations of evil, for, he argued, without evil, we will abandon any notion of the sacred, of that which should not be violated. Without evil, it is difficult to articulate what is good. Delbanco tells us that a gulf has opened up in our culture between the visibility of evil on the one hand and the intellectual resources available for coping with it on the other. The repertoire of evil has never been richer, he writes, but never have our responses been so weak. How this crisis of incompetence before evil came about and how it makes itself felt in the United States is, Delbanco proclaims, a matter of grave concern and genuine worry. From my own childhood, I recall the hushed conversations carried out in a low German dialect between my mother, my Aunts Mary and Martha, and my grandmother about what had happened in the old country, as my grandmother spoke of her birthplace in a German village that was nestled in Russia. My maternal grandparents' people were a small and insignificant people in the overall scheme of things, people called Volga Germans. They could trace their homes in Russia back to the time of Catherine the Great. During World War II, the Volga Germans had either been killed outright or sent into internal exile by the tens of thousands. My grandmother never heard from relatives left behind in the old country again. The charge against them, they hadn't done anything, but they were accused of keeping secret their latent sympathies with the German invaders. My grandparents were among the fortunate. They made it to the United States. They were desperately poor, but they were enthralled by the promise of freedom and a greater measure of justice. Now, Delbanco reminds us of how common such stories are, really. Reminds us that such confrontations with political evil are a basic source of identity historically for most Americans, for the simple reason that so many of us, or our families, or their families before them, fled here to escape such evil. Absent this shared sense of evil, we are left without the moral markers we once depended on for knowing who and where we are. So Delbanco questions whether American culture, shaped as it has been by shared experiences of horror and oppression, can long survive as a culture without some reinvigorated sense of both sin and evil, including our own founding sin of slavery. Both sin and evil are important. Sin, because it reminds us that all human beings fall short of moral perfection, and evil, because it is not just out there, it is in here, and because there is no other empirically accurate way to name certain horrific phenomena. Excuse me. I'm on some medication that is supposed to take care of sinuses, but mostly has the effect of drying out my mouth without succeeding in its main task. Evil is central to Christian theology. You cannot understand Christianity unless you grapple with what theologians call the theodicy question. If God is both all-powerful and all-good, how did evil come into the world? We will not settle that question here today. You'll be relieved to learn. But we do need to keep in mind powerful biblical imagery, the attempt to give a face and a name to evil. For all human beings, without exception, must deal with how societies protect themselves from those who go over to the dark side, whether the subject is domestic criminality or international terrorism. The fascinating struggle of early Christian theologians with this question helps us to appreciate what human beings are up against in their daily confrontations with temptation, sin, wickedness, and evil. There is one instance after another in human history when evil seemed and seems the only way to characterize accurately an event or series of events. St. Augustine is the central figure here, but his complex views are carried forward into modernity. Indeed, many who speak of evil do not appreciate their indebtedness to Augustine, and alas, there are those who say they are Augustinian, but put forward arguments or claims that are radically non-Augustinian. So let's try to get Augustine straight on evil and what can be done, and then show the links to the Dark Knight. For example, Augustine is frequently taken to be a metaphysical dualist. And at one time, during his eventful life, he was a devotee of a group called the Manichaeans, who taught that there were two co-equal principles at work in the universe. One of them was evil, and the other was good. The earth, earthly matter, including our own bodies, are polluted. The further one moves away from the flesh, the matters of the flesh, the better. Augustine struggled for years, but finally repudiated this position, repudiated Manichaeanism because, as he put it, I could make no progress with it. Well, what sort of progress did he have in mind? Precisely this. He wanted to understand evil at its root, its origin. He wanted to rid himself of the evil that was in him as a bodily being. But listening to the sermons of St. Ambrose and under the prodding of his remarkable and determined mother, St. Monica, Augustine labored on. This process of discernment took time and evoked anguish along with joy, but he finally arrives at the truth of it, and that is that evil has no depth. It is a flattening out of the world through a failure to engage it at its roots, which are good. God created the world and said it is good. Creates human beings, creates man, very good. So the root of things is good, and you don't find evil down there. That's why he had labored in vain. In his extraordinary works, including the Confessions and the City of God, Augustine offers an account that lays bare his conviction that evil is not a freestanding active principle, but is instead a privation. It's a diminution. This contrary to the view of evil as an active force, poised eternally against the principle of good, indeed a polluting force against which good is essentially passive. Now, Augustine teaches us through examples and through stories, and one story he tells is that as a child he was caught up in a world of forbidden desires and pleasures. He loved the wrong things. He was tempted and too often consented. In other words, he sinned. Despite these early moments of reckoning, all Augustine succeeds in doing for years is to make of himself what he calls a barren waste. He had no sense of himself. He was empty. He felt flat. He attends the theater in Rome, the theater of cruelty that was normal public fare in the late empire, and asks, why do we revel in the misery of others? If pity were genuine, we would not seek occasions that display their the harm that comes to people. We would not take pleasure over the misery of others, and yet we do. Augustine had been searching for a world in which perfect good squares off against a monolithic rock of evil. And this proved handy, because when things went wrong, he could blame a force external to himself, the evil principle, including his own body, here construed as a source of pollution by definition. But as I've already said, this did not work. He kept thinking and praying and yearning, and it hits him that we can no longer claim that it is we who sin, not we who sin, but some other nature inside of us that sins. But we are not culpable. We are not to blame. I prefer to excuse myself, he writes, and to blame this unknown thing that was in me, but not part of me. The truth, of course, was that it was all my own self and my own impiety that had divided me against myself. Now, from that moment of recognition forward, Augustine understands evil differently. He rejects the notion that it is merely that God created evil as a full-fledged, malignant principle engaged in a cosmic struggle with good. In his mature understanding, evil is stripped of any glory. It is denuded, it is depleted. It is the name we give to an ascent to temptation that may congeal into thoughtless habituation and a chain of servitude. Evil is, in a sense, the unbearable lightness of non-being. How so? Well, the devil and the bad angels, in Augustine's cosmology, are not embodied. For God created our bodies and they are good. So these doers of evil do not understand what it means to live in a beautiful world in incarnate form. As a result, they're filled with resentment, and they spend a good bit of time roaming around and seeking ways to represent themselves concretely. They do this so that they might appear in the world through surrogates. The demon attached to an image by an impious art, Augustine writes, has been made a god by man. The devil's minions are loathers of created life. They would therefore destroy it. Evil is a kind of non-creation, a draining away from that which is. The loss of good has been given the name of evil. Augustine writes, there is no such entity in nature as evil, none. It is a name for the privation of good, the turning away of a limited creature from the good to himself. Stripping evil of any grandeur, as Augustine does, is no small accomplishment, and it is very difficult for us to grasp. I was thinking of this, by the way, just the other day because of the popularity of Nazi memorabilia. There's a brisk market, as you may know, in all things Nazi. Artifacts, books, photos. There's an endless yearning to have something that has to do with the Nazis. Why is that? What's the strange glamour attached to the Nazis. And I think it's the idea that these were daring, evil deed doers. And somehow there's a kind of strange attraction of that, a bizarre heroism that affixes itself to those images and helps to account for their popularity. We're getting to the Dark Knight, by the way. He's coming up. The metaphorical representation of an absence, evil is a nothing, is a very difficult thing to express. How do you explore the horror of evil while denying it the status of a created reality? How do you name a life-killing negation? When we think of evil, we think of self-absorption, cruelty, resentment, self-hatred, even the laughter of the derisive and the mocking. Delbanco offers the image of a knot, K-N-O-T, in his attempt to explain Augustine on evil. The knot does not exist in and of itself. It requires a material entity, a rope. Evil is the twistedness of that knot, not the rope itself. It is always parasitic on that which is good. Perhaps this helps a bit to grasp the complexities of Augustine on evil. All right. Now it is time for our second imaginative leap, the first being 4th, 5th century Augustine on evil, and we're going to turn now to 3 inordinately successful films, director Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. Now, I'm sure I'm probably going to get something wrong and rile you up, and you can correct me if I misplace something. I have a hunch some of you have seen these films more than I, although I have seen the second Batman, I think 3 times. I went to the theaters twice to see the most recent one, so I'm doing okay. Well, the first film was released in 2005, Batman Begins. We meet a strange figure at one point. I'm not doing this strictly chronologically, but showing up in Bruce Wayne's prison cell. Bruce Wayne has fled Gotham City, as you know, somewhere. We're not quite sure where. And this figure tells Wayne to go back. Bruce Wayne, and a mysterious figure named Ra's al Ghul share a mutual hatred of evil and a passion for justice. A group called the League of Shadows are fighters for justice and trying to seduce Bruce Wayne into signing on with this. Bruce Wayne has little interest in being recognized and hailed by all peoples everywhere as one of Gotham's selfless heroes. He simply wants to kill the perpetrator who murdered his parents. And this is too puny a goal for Ra's al Ghul. He wants to eliminate corruption and evil entirely, and the only way you can do it is through complete destruction. The power of fear linked to anger is a nigh irresistible force. You must embrace, Batman is told, Bruce Wayne is told, your worst fear even as you journey onward. Now, Wayne makes it clear that he's no executioner, and this separates him and us from the Ra's al Ghuls of the world. Wayne returns in memory to the moment when, as a little boy, a young boy, he fell into an old well as a child. This place of darkness and abandonment signifies the dark night of the soul Augustine captures so powerfully in his imagery. Wayne has fallen into a bat cave, and having been rescued, he rescues in turn. As with the subsequent Batman films, the atmosphere is dark and rainy and spooky much of the time. The sort of atmosphere that has us frightened before anything happens. As well, the very air we breathe is somehow contaminated. One has that sense that there's something evil that simply suffuses the atmosphere and the environment in which one exists. Ra's al Ghul has refined the process of distilling the essence of fear from one particular blue flower, a toxin that, sprayed on a person, or if you could weaponize it, you could contaminate an entire city that would lead to panic and violence. People would turn into monsters, raping and killing, and devour themselves, destroy themselves. What are we to do? Understanding that making judgments is both tragic and necessary, Augustine offers advice similar to Alfred, the wonderful, loyal Wayne family butler, and much more beside. Alfred, when he finally reconnects with Bruce Wayne after, it's 11 years, I think, calls it endurance. We must endure. This by contrast to Ra's al Ghul's message of violence and despair. Now, the evil on display in Batman Begins is dark and ugly and filthy. The criminal is not complicated. Evil must be beaten back. People are being slaughtered, children orphaned, the honest silenced, the violent rewarded. And what results from that? Only a wasteland, a desert of the spirit, brought about by those, quote, men who just want to watch the world burn, as faithful Alfred says to Bruce Wayne in the second film of the series, The Dark Knight, released in 2008. Now, this film opens, unsurprisingly, with darkness as well. There is mischief and cruelty afoot as thugs, well-organized thugs, set about robbing a bank in the metropolis of Gotham City. But something weird is going on, as one of the perpetrators is executing the others with brutal efficiency. At this point in Gotham City, there are also pretenders to the Batman throne, copycats, but they are besmirching the name. They're fighting with automatic weapons and the like. Harvey Dent, the upright, squeaky clean Gotham City DA, also enters the scene. He preaches the strategic use of violence in our quest to stop the bad guys. And an incorruptible police officer, whom we've met before in the first film, Mr. Gordon, now Commissioner Gordon, is also in the film. Things in Gotham City are not looking up, contrary to what many believe. For we have finally had a glimpse of the bank robber who is boldly executing his partners in crime. And this, of course, is the Joker, with his devastated face, his matter-of-fact cruelty and brutality. He explains how he got that hideous scar that is a smile, a distorted mockery of a smile. Joker's prey is the Batman. Every day that Batman does not turn himself in, Joker says, there will be a dead citizen of Gotham. Now, the plot, as you know, is quite complicated. We've got Rachel in there in the films, loved by Bruce Wayne. She has to be rescued a couple of times. Harvey Dent, with his rugged good looks, becomes the poster boy for cleaning up the city, ridding it of the trash that pollutes it. But let's jump to the colloquy between the Joker and Batman. This after Dent has claimed the mantle of Batman for himself. Joker tells Batman, the real Batman, that the two of them are really alike, that they're both freaks, that freaks enjoy killing and live without any rules. And Joker goes on to tell Batman, do you know why I use a knife? A gun is too quick. You can't savor all the little emotions in those last moments that people show who they really are. Harvey Dent, meanwhile, grabbed by the Jokerites, has been hideously scarred and turned into the character known as Two-Face. You know, one half of his face is just a horror. And he, too, is now after the Dark Knight. In the colloquy, by the way, between the Joker and Batman, the Joker says another thing that's quite interesting. He tells Batman, we need one another. We need one another. I'd like you to think about that. There's a way in which Joker is suggesting again that the evil that he represents is parasitic upon the good that Batman represents somehow. But I don't think that quite works. I'm not quite sure why, but at any rate, something to reflect on. Joker philosophy gets more refinement. I just do things, he says. I'm not a schemer. I try to show the schemers how pathetic their attempts really are. All you have to do is introduce a little anarchy and everything becomes chaos. Now the Joker contrives an unethical stunt. He calls it a social experiment. You wind up with 2 boatfuls of people. There's a remote, one remote in each boat, so one boat can blow up the other boat before the other boat blows them up. And the only question is who will collapse first, who will blow the other boat up first. And they don't do it. Joker is enraged. You can't rely on anyone these days. You have to do everything yourself. And there are more permutations, including a confrontation with Batman that leaves Joker dead. Joker at one point says, we need a better class of criminal in this city. The concluding scenes of the film involve Rachel, Two-Face, Commissioner Gordon, his wife, and children. Harvey Dent, Two-Face, grabs Commissioner Gordon's son, who's 9 years old, and is going to murder him, threatens to murder him. Either Batman capitulates or the boy dies. Well, Batman winds up dispatching Two-Face. He tells Gordon that they, the people of Gotham City, must never know what he did. Tell them I killed these people. Use me as the bad guy, in effect. Because he's the hero, Harvey Dent, that Gotham deserves. He's the hero Gotham deserves. Batman, in the night, tears away. He's become the wrathful protector. Now, how does this map with St. Augustine's theology? Let me remind you that evil, again, cannot generate. It can only create a wasteland. Good is fragile and always under assault, but good cannot be erased altogether. And it is always fragile, again, but it cannot be utterly effaced. And Batman, in that final confrontation, says, I see a city full of people ready to believe in good. And that distinguishes him, certainly, from both Two-Face and from the Joker. All right, we're nearly there, folks. Let's go to The Dark Knight, which is the one I'm sure we all know best at this point, because it's the most recent. Now, Batman has been in exile since that awful night when Harvey Dent / Two-Face was killed and Commissioner Gordon's son was spared, and Batman took on the identity of the villain. Let the animus, put the animus on me. Let me bear the guilt. So that's what he's been doing, and he's been in hiding. Gotham needs an upright hero, he says, and that's not me. It's a period of deceptive civic calm, but all hell is about to break loose. Commissioner Gordon warns the mayor and others not to repeal the Dent Act that enabled Gotham to get the bad guys locked up. This is my handwriting. And he plans to spill the beans, Commissioner Gordon does, about Harvey Dent, to tell the truth. But he cannot quite bring himself to do it in a public forum. Hell comes in the form of a character named Bane, who aims to destroy Gotham and its citizens, who are united by, very interesting phrase, a practiced apathy. They're apathetic. They're taking this period of civic calm for granted and assuming that it will endure forever, which should, of course, never be done. The story, as you know, is enormously complex. There are lots of subplots that are all woven together. It's emotionally wrenching, especially the scenes featuring Bruce Wayne and the ever-faithful Albert. A beautiful French woman enters, Miranda Tate, and she shows how evil can masquerade as good and as beauty. A theme that runs through Augustine very powerfully in his discussions of evil. Much of the film, again, occurs in the dark. In fact, in the sewers of Gotham City, where filth accumulates and we try to flush it away. It's a world mired in dung. Bane is intelligent, determined, and a false populist, I guess you could say. He destroys Wall Street. He announces to the people, we're turning it all back to you. Take anything you want, it's yours. Commissioner Gordon, speaking to an idealistic young cop, says, I just hope that should things fail one day, a friend will be with you. This is Commissioner Gordon to the young cop. A friend will be with you who will be prepared to plunge his hands into the filth in order that yours can remain clean. And the young cop rejects this notion, finds it unacceptable. Now, the scenes of the trials, the summary trials in the last third of The Dark Knight Rises, are quite brilliantly done. All the protections of the judicial system are effaced. A certain class of people is by definition guilty just because of who they are. Again, you needn't have done anything, but because you are, in this case, from a certain class, you are to be eliminated, to be destroyed. Reminding us, of course, historically, of so many cases where just because you were Jewish, or because you were black, or because you were a Catholic, and so on, you are to be destroyed, simply by definition of who you are. In this case, it's based on class, as I said. I have a hunch that Christopher Nolan drew some inspiration from a great film by the Polish director Andrzej Wajda, a film about the French Revolution called Danton. Now, Danton was one of the architects of French revolutionary terror, one of the creators of the Committee on Public Safety. And there's great similarity between some of these scenes. So I would commend to you, if you're aficionados of this Batman film, to try to get Danton, and you'll get a fuller, a more complete sense of these bogus trials and how they worked. Finally, I'm going to skip over a bit because time is of the essence. We have the scene with Batman in a helicopter towing the nuclear device that's been set to go off out to sea. We hear his heart pounding. The sun is shining. It's interesting, that's not a dark moment. The sun is shining. It's almost an elegiac moment. There is silence, a smile, a sort of smile on Batman's face, and then the camera leaves Batman. We're back in Gotham City and see the explosion. And the assumption is, of course, that Batman is dead, that he sacrificed himself for Gotham City. At the little funeral, where there are only 4 people there, I think, or 3, for Bruce Wayne, those who know he was the Batman. I think it's Alfred, isn't it, who quotes Dickens. It is well, actually, no, it's the letter that Bruce Wayne leaves behind, Batman leaves behind, that quotes Dickens. A scene from the French Revolution. Fellow's about to be guillotined. It is a far, far better thing I do than I have ever done. It is a far, far better rest I go to, place I go to than I have ever known. Now, I'm not going to speculate about whether the scene of the Batman with Catwoman and Alfred and the piazza in this Italian city, whether that's a kind of dream or if it's, Batman really escaped the bomb. I'd like to be instructed on this because I don't know for sure, and I've had an argument with my grandson about it, so help me out. All right, in conclusion, there are those of us, and I'm one of them, who fear that if evil escapes our imagination, then it will have established dominion over us. I want to quote Del Banco one more time. He continues in this way: if the privative, evil as a nothing, conception of evil continues to be lost between liberal irony on the one hand and fundamentalist demonizing on the other, we shall have no way of confronting the most challenging experiences of our public and private lives. Now, I thought about this when I thought about my grandchildren because I realized that their first, given their ages, except for the youngest one, 3 older, their first political memory is a memory of evil men seizing great symbols of freedom of travel, commercial liners, and flying them into buildings, murdering thousands of innocent people, many of them moms and dads, who only went to work that day. Well, such children do not need to be fed pap about the world. They know a good bit of how the world is frightening and terrible. And the question is, how do we teach them about such a world and at the same time instill in them moral courage and the determination to endure? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Sorry for my kind of scratchy voice. I apologize for that. Not very much I could do about it. So I'm going to locate myself over here and sit, if it's all right with you, for the Q&A part. And watch you get the better of me in your questions about Batman. I think I can hold my own on Augustine, but okay. Yes?
Hello, my name is Thomas. My question pertains more towards Augustine.
Toward what?
My question pertains more towards Augustine.
Okay.
So as I read the Confessions, I kind of got the idea that Augustine's sense of morality was very Neoplatonist.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the good is how close are we to the good? How close are we to the good? And that seems to portray that the good is something that can never actually be attained. We can get very, very close to it,
yeah.
but we can never actually get there.
Yeah.
Could you please go into a little bit about that, and do you feel like that theme plays out at all in Batman?
Yeah. Well, I think that's correct, as stated in schematic form, which you did very well. That the good, being oriented to the good, to the source of light illumination, means to be oriented to God, of course. And on this earth, we cannot attain, that kind of perfection. The earth is penultimate. It's the penultimate, not the ultimate. We will view the ultimate, if you will, or be in the ultimate, only with the end of time, only with the eschaton. But before that, you're right. There are intimations of the good that we can realize. We can try to attain to the limited good available to us as flawed human beings, but we can never achieve a stance of perfection. And I think the way this can play out in the Batman is the fact that even Bane and his allies in the third movie are seeking a kind of dystopia, a kind of utopia of murder and punishment. You know, we want to perfect destruction. There is a quest to achieve some finality, some cataclysmic moment. And that temptation is a very dangerous one, especially so, I think, when it comes to us in the name of good. When you think of the ways in which the Nazis characterized what they were doing, or the Stalinists, or even, for example, the eugenicists in America in the 1920s, early 19th century, you know, a quest for perfection, again, getting it right. That's has to be tempered. It has to be chastened. We can never attain that. Batman understands, as few seem to, certainly most superheroes don't meditate on this, that he is a bit like Albert Camus' essay on Sisyphus. You know, you roll the boulder to the top of the hill, and it rolls down again, and you've got to roll it back up. That you can never have one final triumph over evil. It's something that has to go on every single day. Evil will have its day, but you don't want to give it its due, if you will. Is that the way it works? Yeah. So, yeah, I think so. At any rate, you know what I'm talking about. So the thing is to have the fortitude and the endurance, you know, for that task. And we can see with the third film, which I think is an astonishing accomplishment, just as a work of cinema, we can see how Bruce Wayne / Batman, how loath he is to go back into the arena. You know, it's terrible out there. It's really hard. And finally, you know, does. There got to be some other. Yes, right here.
So the Joker is, you know, canonically from the comic books and the movies, is like the personification of evil.
Yeah.
And his only drive is chaos.
Yes.
And evil.
Chaos. Yeah. Anarchy.
Would Augustine be able to? How would he feel about that identification? You know, would he even see him as a human being?
So go back 2 sentences. How would Augustine feel about
the Joker?
Yeah. Okay.
As a character, would he feel that was worthy to explore? Would he be hesitant to give someone that much, you know, personification of evil, or would he think that it would be worthy to hold up and to view the Joker and analyze?
Oh, the latter. Absolutely. You know, Augustine stared into the abyss repeatedly because there were so many examples of stark, hideous cruelty all around him. You know, if you think about weekend entertainment in the Roman Colosseum, you know, people brought their children, and real human beings are being slaughtered. You know, blood is rising the floor of the Colosseum. If you've been to the Colosseum, you can imagine it. You know, just the whole bottom part, you know, just sort of covered with blood, given the massive numbers of deaths that have occurred in a given afternoon. You know, that again was family entertainment. The world, it was a world of the late Empire, world of where, you know, you were either a dominator or you were dominated. That was the dynamic. How you break through that and try to achieve some other way for human beings to relate to one another is an enormous challenge, and that's one that Augustine talks about repeatedly. He feared that he himself, you know, was caught up in that dynamic, and talks about that at some length. But the Joker would interest him a lot. You know, that kind of remorselessness and having fun, having a, you know, kind of mordant wit, because the Joker is funny, and you find yourself laughing at some of it, and then you say, ugh, you know, should I be laughing at this? And of course the character was played brilliantly by Heath Ledger. But yeah, Augustine that would interest him. Yes?
Dave, what would you say about the three different villains in the movies? How do you think Augustine would see them, and the differences between them and their personification of evil?
Okay, so we've got Bane, we've got the Joker, and we've got Ra's al Ghul. I think that there is a way in which Ra's al Ghul might interest him the most, because for this reason, because Ra's al Ghul seems to be an example of someone who had a genuine thirst for justice that got distorted and twisted and went awry. Also, he unites in a band with others. There's the kind of band of people working together on this, and that interests Augustine too, more than just the loner type. The fact that he was Ra's al Ghul is, fiercely determined, is obviously very intelligent, has honed his physical powers to the ultimate, and all to these evil purposes. I think that would probably interest Augustine more than the other two, who are, although he'd find them interesting as well, but they're both rather freakish. Do you know what I mean? And Ra's al Ghul, you wouldn't know he was who he is if you just saw him walking down the street. Of course, you'd know it was Liam Neeson, but anyway, it isn't. But you know what I mean. That's what I would suggest. Could be wrong, but I think Ra's al Ghul would interest him the most.
What about their depictions of evil, though? Like how their types of evil are different?
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing, don't you think, is that they all culminate in the same way. They all culminate with the desire for anarchy and complete destruction. Ra's al Ghul wants to reduce the city, Gotham City, to ashes. Joker wants to destroy everything. Bane, too, bomb it, get rid of it, destroy it all. So whatever their individual styles, if we want to call it that, or their modus operandi, the end is the same. And that is a very Augustinian point, in a sense, because what Augustine, it seems to me, was trying so hard to do is to strip evil of any glamour. Say this is not glamorous. This is not something we say, oh, behold the dangerous deed doers, who have more courage than, I know they're doing bad things, but boy, they have a lot of courage to do it and so forth. He wants to strip away all that glamour and say, look, what you've got is an impoverished way of thinking. You have an end result that can only be repeated over and over again, just dull repetition. What's so glamorous about that? What's so attractive about that? Because he knows, on some level, that there is an attraction to evil, to anarchy, and so forth. Yes, over here. You and then you. Sorry to be disappointing, but yeah.
I wonder if you're familiar with the idea of Hemingway heroes.
Of what?
Hemingway heroes.
Someone tell me what she said.
Hemingway hero.
Hemingway hero.
Yes.
As in Ernest Hemingway?
Yes.
And do you have more?
Yes. Okay. Do you think that he and Augustine were onto the same thing? Like, as far as Batman goes, you mentioned that people were it's like a practicality and that they were stuck in that. So Hemingway would be at those levels. So they're like blind people that are like struggling out of their blindness, and then people that are Hemingway heroes that are like perfect and they can go in and survive their living. Do you think that people are stuck in those levels, or do you think Augustine believes that there's a spectrum that you can go from practicing the lowest good to struggling up to the highest good possible?
You know what? Could people make way? Could you come down here and get closer to me? This darn thing, I'm not hearing very well. And I got about half of what you said, so.
Okay.
All right, now let's go. Okay.
Hemingway basically believed in these three levels. There were there's blind people, and then there's sort of blind people that are struggling to be better and living a life worth living, but they aren't there yet. And then there are Hemingway heroes, which are the epitome of being a person, being a good person. Do you think Augustine believes in a spectrum, like he would believe in the Hemingway levels? Do you think the people in Gotham were stuck in those levels, or that that Batman and the Joker are in a different level than the people, and that the people could get up to that level, if that makes sense?
I think I understand what you're asking. First of all, I think, let me say something about Hemingway heroes. Hemingway heroes are very ambiguous characters. You know, they're not just sort of stalwart guys. You know, there are flaws that are visible, and weaknesses, and admission of weakness from time to time, and so on. So I hadn't heard the Hemingway heroes, hadn't heard those two words put together before, but I have read Hemingway, so I have a sense of his heroes. And the heroes are always sort of anti-heroes too. There's always something off with them. They're not, they're not just sort of bright shining lights of courage and determination. I think Hemingway was struggling with masculinity, with how to articulate a notion of masculinity in an era when that which was traditionally masculine was starting to disappear. When the kind of work that men historically did that required, hard physical labor was going away and so on. So what do men do? What defines the masculine? Okay, that's Hemingway. Now, you're talking about the different levels. And do you mean levels of evil or levels of?
Sort of, striving to be good and seeing the spectrum of good and evil.
Okay, well, certainly St. Augustine would, tell me if I'm answering you, would appreciate that there's a big difference between his childhood prank of stealing some pears, even though he wasn't hungry, just wanted the fun of stealing with a childhood friend of his, between that and someone going around beheading every person he sees. These are not, they may both be sinful or evil, but they're not the same thing. Batman, too, obviously, has to triage the dangers, if you will. They're not all identical. We have to separate them out. We have to find ways to discriminate thoughtfully, between one phenomenon and another. And that's something that both Augustine and Batman represent, seems to me. So you're not just, otherwise, you're going to fall into that dualism. We've got evil over here, and then we've got good over here. And it's that dualism that both Augustine and Batman are, fighting against. So, does that help?
Yes, it does.
Okay, you bet. Yes. Oh, yes, do use the mic. That's good.
What I was going to ask actually ties in kind of nicely to that. I was going to say, back to the whole Dark Knight thing,
Yes.
Cosmic dualism. We have the Joker representing chaos and evil, and Bruce Wayne, Batman, a crusader for good.
Yes.
But in the second movie, we kind of get a third worldview in Harvey Dent. When he becomes Two-Face, multiple times he'll flip the coin. He'll say, I don't know, do you live, do you die, it's up to the coin.
Yeah,
Which is kind of a play off the whole make your own luck thing. But at the very end, he says, when Gordon and Batman are confronting him, he says, Gordon says something to the effect of, because it's just not right. And to which Two-Face responds, it's not about what's right, it's about what's fair. And I feel like that's sort of leaning towards a little more modern in sort of a, determinism
Yeah.
sort of thing. But I was wondering where that might fit into Augustine's whole thing about dualism, because determinism didn't seem to come up that often.
Yeah. And when Harvey Dent says it's about what's fair, what do you think he's saying exactly? I mean, what's the fair part?
Well, I assume it's because he's going back to the whole, they could have come for either of us thing, when he and Rachel, you know, the person he loves,
Right.
are in two different places.
Exactly,
and
and
you can choose.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's a coin toss.
Yeah.
What's fair?
Yeah. Yeah.
And kind of about how he's saying it wasn't fair.
Yeah.
Because they chose him based on the fact that they needed him, more or less.
Right, right. So it wasn't, the fair thing would be determined by the toss of the coin, full stop, absent any other consideration. It's a rather impoverished notion of fairness, isn't it? Because we do take account, in our actions towards others, we take multiple features of the situation into account. The one thing I would say, and this is pretty far removed from Harvey Dent, I think, but is a basic sort of claim about the status of the human being. You know, that human beings are creatures who are not to be abused in certain ways. That some such claim, some such notion about the status of the person is absolutely essential to the moral life. Because if we didn't have that, we could, manipulate people any way we want. Why not, do anything we want with them, destroy them, lift them up, willy-nilly. So some solid notion of what there is about human beings that is not to be violated, I think is absolutely essential. I've strayed from the fairness theme, but you prompted that thought on my part. Dent, when he becomes Two-Face, you've got the all too vivid image, of the clean, upright crusader and the horrible, distorted destroyer. And the flip of the coin thing, there's another film in which the flip of the coin determines life and death. No Country for Old Men. If you really want a scary villain, I mean, that's the film to see. Yeah. Absolutely, just an embodiment of evil, it seems to me. Yeah.
I was really interested when you were talking about the fascination with Nazi memorabilia.
Yes.
And also the interest in things like vampires and serial killers. This
I know.
Sort of harkening back to that time of the Romans when they would go and see people killed in front of them for entertainment.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's that moment in The Dark Knight where the two boats don't blow each other up, and Wayne, a.k.a. Batman, has this statement where he says, the city is full of people who are willing to believe in good.
Willing to believe in good. Want to believe in good, yeah.
There seems to be sort of a contradiction there. There's this fascination on the part of people with evil. There's also this inclination towards good, and that sort of plays into this mentality, I think, of, well, people aren't all bad.
Yes.
Fundamentally, people are, good.
Yes.
And just other factors, society, upbringing, that sort of thing, leads them astray. So I was wondering if you would, what would Augustine say about that?
Well, he would complicate the picture a bit. I think what Augustine would say to you would be that where your characterization slips a little bit is the notion that a human being is born and is all good, and in society makes him bad. Remember, Augustine believes in the fall. So every human being who's born is not simply a repository of goodness. We are creatures who are alienated from the moment of our birth in some way. We carry the historic burden of sin along with us. That is, no one is born in a pure, pristine world. everything that's happened has happened, and we can't escape it. So you don't have to have a crude deterministic view that here we have good and then we mess with a kid and he turns bad, but rather all of us are carriers of a moral ambiguity, because we are good, Augustine would say. That is, we are created good. God said, my creation is good, and yet we messed it up with the fall. So we bear the burden of that, and it's unsurprising that we were tempted to and capitulate to temptation as frequently as we do, and yet at the same time, there's this yearning for decency and for peace and for justice and for freedom and so on. So it's that that complex moral ambiguity, that Augustine makes absolutely clear. And he says in one of his letters to a bishop, for example, I forget exactly what the bishop asked him, but it leads Augustine to say, it's a mistake. People think that they convert, they become Christian, and from then on everything's going to be perfect. It will be fine. I've converted, and wow, this is great. But they're going to find they've got the same battles to fight, the same temptations to deal with, and so on. It's not that you now are on a plane where you're removed from those things. You aren't. But you're going to deal with them differently, hopefully. Well, I'll stop with that. One more question here.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to mention or to bring up was one of my favorite parts of The Dark Knight Rises was the scene where Bruce Wayne or Batman, he rises from the prison, actually escapes. And for me, that's just a beautiful scene. And I wanted you to discuss the symbolism in that, and is he coming to some sort of enlightenment about morality or life, or how to live, and how would St. Augustine decipher that?
Now this is a scene. Remind me of which scene this is again.
It's within The Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, but it is right. Describe it again.
He has to sort of recover from a back injury that Bane gave him.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay.
And find a way to get out of the prison.
Okay. Right. Well, those are powerful moments. And I think that the way Augustine would think about that, did you ask how Augustine would think about it? I thought you did. The way Augustine would think about that would be to remind us again of hope, of the fact that the hope that's there. Anger, there's anger, but it's tied to hope and determination and again, endurance. And that there are powers that we have that we don't know that we have until we're sorely tested in some terrible situations. Some people give in, capitulate very easily, and some don't. It would be a hard task to determine in advance. If all of us are in this room, suppose you lived in a Nazified society, and the Gestapo comes to the door and wants you to turn over your best friend to them. They assume they know that you know where your best friend is. How do we know what we would do? Would we do it or would we not do it? Because if we didn't turn over the best friend, it would not just be you, who would be harmed. It would be your family and so forth. So we don't know, can any of us for sure say what we would do at that point? I think that's the kind of question that Augustine, puts to us, and reminds us that the moral life is difficult, is a difficult life to try to live, and it does not mean that we can ever attain some kind of moral perfection, where we would always do the right thing, because he makes enormous allowance for human weakness as well. And so does the Dark Knight, don't you think? Because he recognizes the weaknesses in himself. So, Thank you all very much. Thanks a lot.